Sorry, guys. Oh, apologize for that whole intro where I'm just you listening, watching me not talk. Okay, we'll start that again. New software tonight, and hopefully this is the winning software. Welcome to Growers Live. I'll skip all that. I just want to thank everybody for coming tonight, and also with all the support from our Patreon members. It makes all of our work possible. So in addition to our support from our Patreon members, we're also supported by great sponsors like Farmer's Friend. It's no secret that almost everything grows better in a tunnel. Bring the benefits of greenhouse production to your veggie or flower farm in an affordable and easy to assemble package with Farmer's Friend Caterpillar tunnel kits. They're quick to build and move, come in a variety of styles and sizes, and include everything you need to make installation a breeze. Plus, if you order 2 or more tunnels of any size, you'll get free shipping on your entire order. You guys probably know, but I have 2 of the Farmer's Friend Gothic Pro tunnels, and I absolutely love them, and I highly recommend them to everybody. And also be sure to check out Farmer's Friend's growing selection of small farm tools and supplies like the Pyro Weeder, silage tarps, landscape fabric, row covers, shade cloth, irrigation kits, and more. If you're ready to increase efficiency on your farm and earn higher profits with less work, visit farmersfriend.com today. So as usual, guys, we will chat for a little bit, but I know we have a lot of questions, and we'll probably get to them shortly. And so we'll take questions from our Patreon members first, and if we do have time, we'll take them from the chat. And in terms of schedule, coming up in 2 weeks, we'll have Jane from Earth Care Farm, and then on June 8th, we'll have Eric Schultz from Steadfast. Excited about both of those. So with that out of the way here, let's get Jesse in here, and hopefully I don't screw this up. All right, we got you, Jesse.
Am I in? All right, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Jesse. So
great.
Most
nice.
of you guys,
I was almost going to pretend like I was muted, just as an homage to your opening.
Please don't, Jesse. You have no idea. You've never on this side of this. As you guys don't know, like, we've been struggling. We're farmers, right? And like, we're learning how to do all this, and we've been struggling with a lot of audio for the Growers Live, and I think we have it, guys. Let us know how we sound tonight. But I'm pretty happy so far. Jesse, what have you been up to, man? How you been?
Oh my gosh, all the things.
Yeah,
we've been good. We're getting ready to go to our first market this weekend on the new farm, and we're about 3 weeks behind where we thought we'd be because of drainage issues, and like beyond drainage issues that we kind of had foreseen some compaction in our gardens, and we could talk about all this later, but we kind of foresaw some compaction issues in our gardens. So we started working on those, but what we didn't foresee was that, like, it is an unbelievably wet spot. Our first plot is where we put all of our first starts in. So it's just been wild. And then, but everything's good. Like, season 3 just wrapped up, and headed into the summer. Collaborative farming podcast is coming up soon with Jackson Roulette. We'll do, I think, 10 or 11 episodes of that. So that'll come out here in about a month. And we've got some other stuff coming up in the summer for podcast, in the podcast realm, and then doing videos and all those good things. So yeah, it's a hoot.
yeah. Well, I know it's been, I don't even know when I was at your place, Jesse, a couple weeks now.
Like 3 weeks, 2 weeks.
All right. Well, if you guys want to see what Jesse's up to, I did a tour video on my channel. If you guys want to see sort of what's going on there, and it's been awesome to watch you rebuild your farm and incorporate all the stuff that you like to incorporate. So, do you want to just get into questions, or is there anything else you just want to chat about? I feel like there's a lot of people who want to ask you stuff. So,
yeah, let's jump into questions. We can always
sidebar
chat at the end. So, yeah, we can always sidebar. that will happen. Digressions are commonplace here.
All right, cool. First of all, so first question here is from Mike Mustard, and Mike asked a lot of questions, so we'll probably just get a couple in from Mike. Hey, Jesse, you've interviewed a ton of folks and clearly love experimenting with all sorts of different techniques for improving your farm. What have you found to be a good technique for taking an idea and running with it in order to see if it works, rather than constantly being distracted by competing ideas and opinions that you come across?
Oh my gosh, constantly distracted is me.
Yeah,
that is like me to a T.
I was like, I don't think you've overcome that. I think that's just what you do.
Well, I'm in a position that I can do more experimentation than the average person, because we use no-till growers as an opportunity to buffer some of that, and also I use our farm as an opportunity to trial a lot of stuff that other people, I wouldn't want to see other people who are completely in a production context, who have to rely 100% on that income to trial, living pathways on, I don't even know how many we have right now, 20 beds with living pathways, maybe more. So those sorts of things where we're able to trial those on a greater scale, because I have a little bit of income coming in from no-till growers. So But for the average person who wants to see if these kind of things work in their context, it's all about starting small and doing small trials. Because if you do, for us, even trying to think of an example, I mean, sticking with the living pathways one, I think that's going to be a theme for the night. But we started small with that. We started one plot that just had 2 beds with living pathways on either side. So it was like 3 living pathways. And we managed that, and we kind of saw how that went with a couple different crops, and then we've expanded from there into smaller crops and trialing it with a bunch of different stuff. So, yeah, I mean, the key is for the average person to start small. But the other thing about our farm is that it is on a production context. Like, we do rely almost wholly on our farm income as our income for the year. We just have a little bit of buffer from things like no-till growers that help. For us to be able to experiment a little bit more. But yeah, we always trial these things with crops that we're taking to market. So, and that we're relying on those sales to get us through the season. So yeah, it's I think for the average person, you got to start small and, plan it out pretty well.
Yeah. What does Ben Hartman recommend? Like 10 or 15% you should experiment with every year, something like that.
Right. That sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah. So you just plan to have you plant more than you need, and you have some less than ideal growth on some stuff.
Right. Yeah. You wouldn't, and you also experiment with stuff that's like, you wouldn't want to experiment with super tender crops, depending on what it is. You want to experiment with some of in the case of living pathways, of course, you want to experiment with something that's like, we did it with okra and corn. It was like, these are crops that are, if we lost them, it wasn't going to be the end of the world. And those sorts of things. But yeah.
Okay.
10 or 15% is probably a good idea.
Yeah, and I think if you don't know the name of your farm, if people don't know the name of your farm is Rough Draft Farmstead. So I feel like, it's kind of the way it goes over there.
It's just endlessly appropriate for us. New farms, new ideas, always a rough draft. Yep.
All right, cool. Nicholas Echeverry. Hi, Jesse and Josh. Would love to hear your thoughts about the sustainability of our practices. We surely are steering food production in the right direction and significantly lowering its footprint, and I'm truly happy about it. But are we there yet? Is our model sustainable at a worldwide scale? Do we have to be vigilant about propane-heated greenhouses, dependence on plastic, mesh fleece covers, use of high volume of compost or potting soil? For example, I'm scared of the development of microgreens. I don't see any regenerative content in it except the cash flow when starting up. Jesse, I feel like this is another long conversation that we could probably have.
Yeah, this could be another one of those. If anybody's been watching the channel, Josh and I put up one a couple of weeks ago where it was just us talking about this one idea. And we're going to have another one coming up this weekend. But no, it's a great question.
It is.
I think, with something like no-till, I always think of it as not like a practice, but a goal. It's like something you're moving towards is, tillage reduction and tillage, decreasing the amount of impact that you're having, negative impact you're having on the soil. So, in terms of like, are we there yet? Are we going to hit like a real, is this truly sustainable? Are we there yet? Are we headed towards it? I think we always should be and are headed towards it. And that should be the goal of any regenerative farmer, of any no-till grower, is that you can't hit what you're not aiming at. And, we should be aiming at sustainability, and we should be aiming at a decrease in plastic usage and a decrease in fossil fuel usage. And we should be doing that incrementally every year, reducing those things. Like, for instance, plastic. We don't have any landscape fabric on our farm anymore. We don't even put it, on the sides of our farms, like on the sides of our plots anymore. We are slowly getting away from the tarps. I have a plan in place this year that we'll see how it goes, but we're usually, when we do our garlic, we'll pull our garlic in, late June or early July and tarp those beds. And after that, we'd pull those tarps back, and then we could sow into, kind of a blank space. But this year, I'm going to pull the garlic, cultivate it, sow a cover crop of buckwheat, let that buckwheat come up, mow it really close, and then sow carrots, and try and get away from using tarps. Like, try and think more strategically about how I can do that. Even if it's a little bit more work in the immediate, and it's, because tarps are nice because you can just throw them on and forget it. But I want to get away from using that. So I think as long as your goal is to, create your practice, your specific, your own practice, make that more sustainable, then you can get there. Like, if it, I really, I've talked to Jackson and Josh a lot about that idea of just like, you can't hit what you don't aim at. And that's, I think that's important.
Yeah, I think this is a very complicated topic, and I think that we all have to just continually try to do better every year as we change our practice, think about what we're doing as more technology becomes available, more techniques and things like that. And, people get on me all the time about using plastic bags for produce and greenhouse plastic and stuff like that. And, frankly, the reality is like, okay, so we have these plastic tarps or plastic on our greenhouses, but the food's traveling 10 miles or 20 miles. Like, it's not traveling from South America or California. And I think that gets overlooked a lot. So it's not like black and white with a lot of this stuff. It's like just try to do better every time we can. And I totally agree with you, Jesse. I think it's one of those things we just got to keep working at. We're never going to get there unless we keep working at it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, things like compost are an interesting one too, because the compost thing, is using a bunch of compost. Is that a sustainable practice? And I think that it can be. And the increase in, demand for compost also increases the demand for waste, like food waste and those sorts of things. So maybe if we can get more food waste out of the landfills to meet up with a demand for compost, it could start to have a much broader, ecological benefit. So yeah, I mean, I think aim for it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we got some questions about living pathways here, which I know you want to talk about. It sounds like people are interested also. And I'm also like, I'm terrified. I don't think I could have the guts to do it, but I saw them at your place, and you're committed to at least in some of your areas. So, excuse me. So Mike has a question here, and I have a couple, so I'll just read them, and then we can just talk about them. I've been leaving my weeds in the pathways because lack of time, and I've been weed whacking them weekly. I seem to get a lot of material dumping onto the crops, and then during harvest I have to pick them out. Are you experiencing the same thing, or do you have to try to have living? Yeah, so like, do you have certain you had mentioned already keeping corn and okra next to your living pathways, but that was mainly because they were less fragile. But like, what about just like when you're mowing or weed whacking, like is any of the material winding up in the beds? I guess that's kind of the question.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that has to be figured out. So weed whackers are not great for this against, tender greens and that sort of thing. And the reason is because weed whackers are indiscriminate in where they're just going to throw the roughage. So for us, we've been using, and I'm not necessarily recommending this yet, I don't know, a 60 volt, 17 inch electric mower. And it basically is just a mulching mower. It throws it right back down. Not a flail mower. It does spin to the side, but it's not throwing it out the side. It's throwing it behind. You can put it in a bag, but we're not putting it in a bag. We're just letting it set it right back down. So we haven't had that issue yet. Now, one of the big questions, though, is the edging, because I like edging with the weed whacker in a metal blade. We always use the metal blade. We never use the plastic in the garden because we don't want the microplastics in the garden. But the string is what I'm talking about. But we use the metal blade, and the metal blade, you can turn it up on its end. You can watch videos on like how landscapers do edging this way, and you turn it up on its end and you kind of just go and edge it that way. But that makes a mess with the weed whacker. So you can't have that stuff spilling on top of your greens and cutting it because they'll rot, or you'll end up in your salad mix or whatever. So I think that's something that needs to be figured out. Today I was using the side of a collinear hoe not a collinear hoe. Sorry, I was using a stirrup hoe. And I think a stirrup hoe could be designed to do this in a way, like it could be more of a triangle hoe, just to run it along the edges really quickly. Because I was doing it with a stirrup hoe, but it was kind of it wasn't exactly the right fit. But something like that could be designed. And I've told Josh and everybody, I want to say it 100 times, that I think a flail mower with the edger on the sides, so an 18-inch flail mower with edgers at the 18-inch points on the side, that's the tool that we need.
Okay. All right. So no, I know, but not everyone's got 18-inch walkways. Like, how it's got to be adjustable, or everyone's got to go to 18 now.
You could it's adjustable. It's in my imagination, sure, it's adjustable.
Okay.
Or you can go up to 21. There's already a bunch of mowers at 21. 18 is actually hard to find a good mower.
Yeah, but these mowers aren't made for like mowing living pathways. They're just mowers.
Oh no. I contacted this brand that makes like really nice 18-inch mowers, and I explained what I was doing, and they were like, "No, please don't use our mower."
Really?
I mean, basically, they were like, we don't think that's going to be the right fit for you.
Okay. All right.
Because it's like, they're super, it's like a $2,000 mower. And I was, not that I was going to buy that, but I was like curious. And so I wrote them, and yeah, they were like, don't do it.
Okay. Here's a question, another follow-up question about living pathways from Festpool. What are some preferred living pathway crops other than just weeds? And does it make a difference in Zone 8A when terminating cover crops such as winter rye or hairy vetch? What's the best? Well, this is another question. Yeah. So like, what about what sort of crops what's growing in your pathways? Or do you think you should, I know you talked to me about this before, but like what, do you just let grow what grows, or do you try to plant certain things, or how's that working, or what do you think about it?
I don't know. Well, I have two. I'm of two minds on that. I know that Helen Attow has done some work on strip tillage on pretty big acreage, and she sowed red clover, I think, and she was kind of managing that with a mower. But she said eventually the mallow came up and took over. And that's kind of been our experience. It doesn't really matter what we sow in there. Nature's just going to kind of choose for us. And it depends a little bit on how you mow, and if you mow it super tight or if you let it get kind of big. Depends on what crops are maybe beside it, how long you can let it get. We're kind of, we don't want to mow it so tight that it ends up being the only thing survives as Bermuda grass. But we don't want to let it get so big that we get a lot of weed seeds. So it's kind of, I don't know. I mean, I think that a lot more experimentation could be done on what would work best. And you'd probably want crops that thrive in all sort of 4 seasons, right? You'd probably want clovers and stuff that would go through the fall, spring, and summer. And then you'd probably want something that would deal with the heat, and especially here in Kentucky, deal with the heat. And also, that's another thing. I don't know if anybody asked about climate and where these work, but this is not something I recommend necessarily out west where you don't have abundant water sources, because it is going to compete with water. And here it's actually, and maybe there's a question about this actually, but it's actually been helpful for us in our moisture. Yeah. To have those living pathways.
Okay. So the follow-up question there was, when terminating cover crops such as winter rye and hairy vetch, what's the best method for planting into it with seedlings, or do you use like larger seeds like beans and legumes?
For planting another crop
after terminating the winter
terminated.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my favorite method is to terminate the winter cover crop, and you can either, however you're going to do that. And then using transplants and using the auger bit on the drill. I love that. That's been my preferred method, is you terminate the cover crop and then you go through with the auger bit and you drill your holes and you pop your transplant in there. I mean, that's it. Even Daniel Mays, who's done a lot of work with cover crops, obviously he talks about, it's time consuming. Like there's a lot of time put in, but it's a good crops comes out. And I think that's, it's a little bit extra work, but I do like the auger bit on the drill. I think that's so fast. It's fast, and you can do it standing up, and you don't have to get down with a trowel and dig your holes that way.
Is that mainly for? I know you did a video on it, but is that mainly for like bigger stuff, like tomatoes and stuff like that, or are you using it for like smaller stuff?
They have different sizes, so we can do. We've done it with there's like an 1.5 inch diameter one, or like a 2-inch one that we use for like the smaller transplants, and then we have like a 4-inch one that we use for tomatoes and peppers and that sort of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
Cool. Jody Miller, let's talk about drainage. I'm interested in your drainage issues, and I'll chime in too. I've had some of these problems too. I didn't quite figure it out, but I have similar problems on newly established beds. Diversion seems to be controversial for large scale farms. So what are your thoughts on diversion, like field tiles, trenches, vertical bed orientation versus catchment like swales, keyline management, and horizontal bed slope orientation?
Yeah, I mean, all of those things are context, especially like the swales and that sort of thing. For us, we've always gone across the slope, and that's partially to catch water because our summers can be pretty dry. And also because what we found is that when we go downhill, downslope, which everything in Kentucky slopes. So like it's hard to find any flat land here. So everything I've ever grown on has had some sort of slope to it. And what we found is that when you go downhill, you lose a lot of stuff in the pathways. Your wood chips or your mulches or your just soil, it just erodes. And that's what we, because our rainfalls are wild. We've got 2 inches every week. I think for the last 4 or 5 weeks, we've got 2 inches of rain every week. And some of it comes all at once. And it's just, it's really intense. So, so for that sort of thing, I do in some ways though, regret not putting that first plot pointed downhill, and then leaving it in living pathways so that I could hold the pathways there with the grasses, but let the water shed a little bit more. But what we learned is, like I said, we didn't know that we had the drainage issues we had. And I thought I did everything right. I did everything like I, always done and always thought, recommended that people do. But what we didn't know was that there was drainage tile, old, probably 20, 30-year-old drainage tile, who knows, pointed straight at that first plot in our garden. So we found it digging a little bit more drainage tile, because I'm not a fan of drainage tile. Just burying plastic. But in the situation that it was so muddy around our barn, we couldn't get our BCS in and out of it, and we couldn't do it. It was just mud, and it was filling up where all of our tools and stuff were being kept. And we basically had no choice but to divert some of that water. And so when we started digging, that is when and I'm glad we did now, because when we started digging is when we found this other drainage tile that was pointed into the garden. So we got to, at least part of it, we actually got to turn away from the garden now. So that may help over time, but our moisture issues have been intense. And I do think to some extent that the beds that have living pathways on either side of them in those drainage areas are dealing with it significantly better, because they have that evapotranspiration happening with the grasses and the pathways. It's allowing that water to escape a little bit better. Whereas the wood chip paths are doing terribly. They're incredibly moist. And it's like walking on a bog. It's like walking in a swamp. And that's not a knock on wood chips, because I love them in other places. But this particular case, it was the wrong choice, I think. I think the choice should have been living pathways through all the beds here. What we're also doing to correct that is we're raising our beds now. Slowly, as crops come out, we're going through with the rotary plow and getting them high and broad forking and really working on that compaction. And this is something like people think about with tillage. They're like, well, broad fork is tillage. And we're like, well, no photosynthesis is tillage. Nothing could be worse for your soil than a crop that stalls out and it can't photosynthesize. That the moisture is so intense, and that the anaerobic toxin, the gases created by anaerobic organisms are so toxic to the roots, that there's no growth. That's worse than, taking a broad fork and helping to air it out a little bit. That's why I always recommend people just avoid the dogma, because you're going to be in the situation where you feel like you can't, you don't want to do anything. You want to be a never tiller, and you end up in a situation where your drainage is so bad that it's killing your crops. It's really important to me to emphasize that it's all about your context. Like, don't worry about what anybody else says is and is not tillage. That stuff does not matter. What matters is that you get your crop photosynthesizing. So that's what we've dealt with our first planting, and it's been an interesting adventure. And it's given me a new perspective on clay, because I did not realize the extent to which we were privileged, Hannah and I, in all that we've grown. Like, all the soils that we've ever grown in have been great. Like, sandy loam, or like, nice and loamy and really fluffy, good soils. Almost, I think we've been on 5 farms plus worked on a couple farms. Yeah, it's always been nice soil. And now I'm dealing with a much higher percentage of clay that doesn't drain. And it's a good experience for me, because I finally understand that when people say, like, I have poor drainage, like, truly what it means. Like, I've seen it, I've been to farms that have had it, but I've never dealt with it on my own farm. So it's been an interesting adventure.
So I do have the heavy clay, and that's the only thing I know. So, my plot is definitely steeper. And I think, like you said, it's very contextual. And I think you're right, Jesse. After seeing your property and what's going on there, like, if you did put them downhill with living pathways, I think you'd be in much better shape. But like when you start a farm and you get going, and sometimes either you don't see what the thing is until it's too late, or you have to really think about how to move the water around your property. I think that's the biggest decisions you have to make on your farm, is how you're going to move the water around. Like on my, here when I had beds outside, I had them on contour roughly, and then I had ditches that ran along the top and between the beds to get the water away. Because when we get those heavy storms, like you get 2-3 inches in an afternoon or overnight, and yeah, you'll lose everything. Like it just washes everything out. And if I had my beds going downhill, it would just wash everything downhill. Like especially in the walkways, like no way with the wood chips or anything like that. So yeah, I think if you can do something like that, I think raised beds are great. But again, it depends on like how much water and how much you get and how quickly you get it, and what the slope of your land and the soil. It's complicated for sure. But yeah. I think you're right. Like don't get stuck on dogma. Like you got to make it work. It's better to grow vegetables than not grow vegetables,
It's better for everything. The soil, yourself, your pocketbook, all those things.
Absolutely. All right.
Yeah,
so I think that question was mainly about like diversion of water. I think it was sort of the gist of that question and how we thought about it. But I guess there was part of it in there about like, are we letting things leach and stuff like that? I don't know if like for bigger farms, if that's an issue, or I don't know, like just like letting water run off your property. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean it's all important questions. I think it depends on your context. Like for us, that's another thing. That's another thing that I did think about when it comes to putting our fields downhill or our beds downhill. Is that our neighbor? Like we have neighbors right right up against our fence, so all of that would have been flowing right into her property. And she already made the joke that she has quite the grass crop growing this year because of her new neighbors, and so, yeah, I mean, that's kind of something I think about too, is, you definitely have to be environmentally conscious in how you're managing these things. Ideally the water stays there and the plants consume it, and you grow your organic matter, your soil organic matter. So like I mentioned, raising our beds, the other thing that we're going to be doing is doing a lot more cover cropping in that plot, taking it mostly out of production in the fall and through the winter, and trying to grow some really nice cover crops in some really brand new raised beds that have been broad forked, and get those roots as deep in there as we can and grow that organic matter. Because ideally, you store that water, and you store it in the right way, and the soil organic matter moves deep into the soil for you. The other thing is that we're on a slope, so like I was a little bit surprised.
I was too.
Yeah.
I was like, you're on a slope. This shouldn't be a problem here. Totally was.
Yeah, you never know.
Yeah.
It's wild. I mean, I looked at all the soil maps and all that stuff, and no, I didn't have any indication that it was even, we moved in December, and even then it wasn't that bad. In January, I started to be like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. All right, cool. So there's another question here from Liam Dolan. It's kind of a long question, but basically the wood chip paths were easier to navigate during the wet times, but plants growing in the beds downslope had a tendency to wilt the days afterwards. The soil paths lost much more soil and were difficult to navigate. And their fellow farmer says that the field never suffered from the rain as badly with the old grass paths. That's hard to say. Though he still wouldn't go back. Can you please talk about your experiments in different pathways and how they affect the drainage and effects on the plants and soil? I think we kind of covered that for the most part.
Yeah, and I still want to say that it's still in the early stages of my experimentation with living pathways in terms of all these other crops. I mean, there's so many different things. I have some next to carrots. I have some next to, and those are the ones that are draining better on that plot, is the ones next to the carrots, thankfully. And then next to lettuces, next to longer season, maybe, brassicas and that sort of stuff. Like, we'll see. I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting. I like to think that maybe there's some, all the benefits of like the perennial cover crop idea of how, that's something that comes up a lot, is the idea of a perennial cover crop. I have definitely kind of looked at that and trialed that and found that I think the closest thing that we're ever going to see in production agriculture to an effective version of that is going to be living pathways. And I mean, I think it's possible to have some crops growing right in the middle of your crops, and violets seem to be the one that really will want to grow on our property, and I'm kind of just letting them go in the garlic a little bit just to see how that goes. But for the most part, I think, the living pathways are going to provide all the benefits of the perennial cover crop, with it still being a viable commercial option. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think another thing to add to that is that I think a lot of people who maybe are just getting into this or just are really interested in this kind of topic and kind of influenced by permaculture as well, and you see a lot of these permaculture techniques in really arid climates where they're trying to store water, right? Like you create these swales and everyone's like, oh, you have to put in swales. It's like, or capture water in some ways. It's like, man, in my property, I got to get rid of the water as fast as possible. Like it rains so hard and the ground doesn't hold it, with clay. So like for me, the best thing to do is move it. So I'm not trying to store water. Like it would be terrible if I stored water.
Yeah.
So as you said, context is important, but I think a lot of people, I don't know, they see like one method and they want to apply it everywhere. I don't know. You probably hear that stuff too.
Yeah. And I mean, I've never grown out in California, so I don't know out west where the challenges would be, where those things would be extremely important. Water management. I think water management is important no matter where you farm. But like in our case, like you said, we're kind of trying to figure out how to deal with excess water, and they're out there they're trying to store it. Trying to figure out how to store it.
Yeah.
So.
All right, cool. Chris,
and often the answer is the same. It's always soil organic matter is like one of the biggest, and reducing your compaction. So
absolutely, and keeping plants growing and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, living plant roots all the time.
All right, Chris Fenning says, I enjoyed the sit and stitch you all did a few weeks back. This is funny, people are commenting on this, but I think I don't know. I think you two should do more of that. I mean, both of you basically made it. Books, sponsorships, YouTube followers, and podcasts. Jesse, you feel like you've made it? I don't know what that means.
I don't know. That's a hard one.
I feel like I'm still trying to learn how to farm. Like,
Oh, it's funny because Hannah and I were just talking about that a little while ago. Just like we're having like a crazy hard month financially because our capital keeps going up and down. It's just like this farm sucks it up, and then we dump it back in the farm, and then it comes back, and then we're have this early planting where 3 weeks. We thought we'd be at market for the last 3 weeks. So yeah, like. I don't know. Is that making it?
I don't know, man. It would be, I agree. I don't know. It would be interesting to take a poll on what topics to discuss and then sit here and then chat about it. So, with so many people farming for their first year this last year, I think it would be good to shed some real world light on the farming bubble. My guess is at some point it'll bust. I bet the amount of farms in the last 2 years has doubled. And how can the sourcing of materials keep up? Companies can't grow fast enough and custom. Yeah. I think we did talk about that a little bit in that video and sort of the pace of the industry and sort of the supply chain behind it. I think that's a real.
Yeah.
What were you gonna say?
I missed the rest of that question.
It wasn't really a question. But just basically like, talking about the bubble. Is there a bubble that's going to burst with, small scale farming and that sort of thing?
Yeah. I mean, probably that's a great question. I think, to some extent, sure.
And in some areas,
every time there's a big push on something, you're looking at some amount of a bubble, and I think in some places it will, but I think a lot of people will give it a try, and that's kind of exciting. I mean, kind of cool to think that people will, give farming a try because they finally had that the straw that broke the camel's back sort of thing. With COVID, and they were just like, no, I need to know how to grow my own food, and I need to know, I want to feed my community and stuff, and that's awesome. I think that's amazing.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, so we had when's that other video going up, Jesse? Is that this Sunday?
Sunday.
All right, so there'll be another one, and you guys will leave the topic to be a mystery. I guess you're gonna have to wait till Sunday.
Right. Yeah, but it would be cool to do more of those and get some topic ideas. Maybe we'll put that up on Patreon and people can throw up some topic ideas.
That's a good idea. Yeah, let's do that. If you're down, if people want it, I don't know. And if you want to talk more, Jesse, I guess we talk anyways. Might as well record it. That's what you said. I was like, all right, let's do it. All right. So Leonard Schmiel, the amendments being generally added seem to be an alternative to artificially or chemical pushing sustainable regenerative ideology. Given your interviews with Dr. Jones and Ingham, are we kidding ourselves by their use?
With synthetics. I think that it's the synthetic. Okay, so let's just start with this. Synthetic fertilizers and those sorts of things are not good for your soil. They on many levels. They sort of baby the plants. The plants don't make the associations they need to make with the not just mycorrhizal. Not all plants are mycorrhizal associated, but microbes in general. And they, when they end up needing them later in the year, when they need, a different variety of nutrients, they don't have those associations to rely on, and they haven't built up those microbial populations. So it's not helpful. You're not building soil organic matter because they're not putting the roots as deep into the soil. There's no real benefit to the synthetics. But all of that isn't to say that there aren't benefits to some nutrient applications, foliar applications, and those sorts of things. I think, especially if they're coupled with biologicals, I think that's important. But the sort of chemical fertilizer stuff is opposite of what we're trying to do. It doesn't build the soil life. It doesn't build soil. It doesn't harbor. It doesn't gather water and help us move water the way that we need it. Those things are they're I think if that is what people are doing, then it's that's then they would maybe wouldn't use the phrase kidding themselves, but I think that they will learn at some point that it's not effective, and that we're seeing a lot of people leaving farming. We're seeing older generations of conventional farmers not wanting to do it anymore. It's not fun. It's expensive. Those amendments are not cheap. The synthetic ones, the fertilizers and the pesticides, the herbicides, that stuff's not cheap, and they have to be pretty precise about it, and then they don't make very much money. And I think that's just a recipe for a system that nobody wants to get into over time. So yeah, I mean, the biologicals are more fun. Like, you should enjoy your fertilization program. Like, that should be a good time. You should go out with your sprayer and you're mixing up your little, concoction, and then you're putting that's so much fun. And that's how farming should be. And I think like regenerative agriculture is exciting for a lot of people because it's so much more engaging. It's so much more fun to make those concoctions, and instead of being like, okay, I bought my 10-10-10 and now I'm going to mix it up and put it in my high boy and go out and spend 6 hours on driving around. I just don't think people want to do that anymore. I think they want to get their hands dirty and make crazy, K&F concoctions and stuff. It's fun. It's so, and I think in that vein, and I'm just going to ramble for a second. Sorry, Josh.
That's all good, man. You're the guest tonight. Yeah, I know. You're the guest tonight.
Right. I'm the guest. So, I just think I think about, this must've been 2005. I was working in a wine shop in New York City, and I'd been working in wine for maybe a year. Like the whole convoluted story, but I was selling wine. Like, I was selling, wines to, in a retail shop. And I loved the job. Like, I love retail. If you see me at the farmer's market, I'm always having a great time. But I noticed at one point, I was like, wait, I don't even think I like wine. And I don't know what happened. Well, I do know what happened, but I basically realized at some point all the wines tasted the same unless they were aged for a really long time. They were, the high-end Burgundies and Bordeauxs and those sorts of things. It was just not very interesting. It wasn't very engaging. So what happened was that I got another job, a second wine shop job. A friend of mine who was like, hey, these guys are looking for a part-time employee. Do you want to go over there and see if you can pick up a couple extra hours? And I was like, sure. And they were selling more interesting wines, a lot of boutique stuff, a lot of biodynamic stuff. And I started tasting those wines, and it just clicked. I was like, these wines are good. They're alive. They taste better. What's the difference? And I started to look into the practices. And yeah, it was a lot of biodynamic practitioners who were just out there, burying cow horns and really, and you can look at the science, and people can argue all the time, biodynamics just doesn't improve the soil biology that much, or blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you know what? If it tastes better and the farmer's out there loving it, if the farmer's out there enjoying making their concoctions, they're having a good time, you're going to taste it in the wine. It's just how it goes. And those conventional wines that I've been selling for a long time, they were just boring. They didn't have the passion behind them. They were out there spraying their 10-10-10 like they're, says on the label. But the people that were out there having a good time and really enjoying themselves, I think that made the wines better. Just even if it wasn't something you could quantify, you could taste it. And I always think about that when I'm farming. It's if I'm having a good time, people are going to taste it, and without obviously polluting or making them sick. I'm trying to put good biological action in the soil and care for my soil and care for my plants. And I think it comes out in the end product.
I agree. The food tastes different, Jesse. Now that I've been doing this is my fourth season, and every time I pull crops out of the ground, I'm like, this does not taste like the food I remember from before I started doing this, or you buy from the supermarket. You know what I mean? It's just grown differently. You can tell. So
yeah.
But I don't know if everyone wants to go out there and mix up concoctions. I think some people do want to open the bag. I wish more people wanted to go, nerd out about that stuff. But all right.
And and those and they exist, and they'll exist for a while. Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Sauntering Roots Farm. They wanted to hear about Living Pathways too, but we already talked about that. Main question though, I enjoyed hearing yesterday's podcast episode and talking about the anxiety of farming, especially in May. I know you have been all been doing a CSA for several years now. Does the early season CSA and farming anxiety ever go away, or at least decrease with time? Or what helps you and other farmers lessen the anxiety? It's a subject I think a lot of farmers feel, but I haven't heard a lot of on the podcast or other avenues.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, from prior experience, Hannah and I are not doing a CSA this year for the spring. We may do one in the winter, but we're not doing one for the spring. But we've done a CSA for 11 years or something. And that spring anxiety is intense, especially with the CSA, because you want to give your customers a great diversity of food, and you really want it to be good. And then you're looking at your products, and it's like a bunch of greens, and you're worried that they're going to be disappointed, or that you're going to have to explain to them every week that tomatoes are coming, or squash is almost here, whatever it is. And I think that what we've kind of settled into is, one, you get more confidence as you grow, like as you do it over and over again. You just get more confidence that food you're waiting on is going to come, and when it's going to come. You can see it growing. You've done it 100 times, and that helps a lot. But also you learn to communicate more with your customers and just be more transparent with them. And I think one mistake that we've made over the years is just not being transparent with people, like necessarily, kind of putting on the sort of Instagram look of like, hey, everything's great, don't worry, instead of being like, hey, we're having drainage issues and it sucks. And, it's slowed everything down. I was on the phone with the chef today, and he's like, are you going to be able to meet our order? And I was like, I don't think so. And it sucks. And I was like, here's what happened, and that's like, the drainage issues have pushed all of our crops back, and we're 2 weeks behind on basically everything. And he understood, and he was like, cool, man, just let's keep in touch, and we'll work on another project. And it is, that stuff is hard, but as long as you're consistently transparent with people and transparent with yourself too, it's something I still battle with, is being honest with myself when I'm looking at a crop and wishful, like, it's going to be there, it's going to happen, it's going to make it, instead of being like, is it going to make it? Do I need to start making other plans? Do I need to start figuring out, something to replace this with in the CSA box, for instance, since we're talking about the CSA. And you get better at being a little bit more agile. Often in that sort of situation where I'm looking at like 5 items and I want 6, or usually we'd go like minimum of 6 items, 7 or 8 is generally what we'd go for, depending on what was in the basket. But like, if we looked like we were going to be one short, I increasingly would know of 2 or 3 weeks ahead of time, so that I could get some microgreens going, or I could get, or I could take something else and get some other stuff started to replace that, maybe get a round of radishes that would replace something else that I was taking from the next week. So, the anxiety it slowly goes away as you get better. And I think, all of those things, it's always a little tough. And then, make sure I think the community, the customers like to know their farmers and like to see you when you're prospering, but also like to know what you're going through, and they're there. They want to help, and they understand that farming's up and down. So yeah.
Can you see the comment on the screen, Jesse? I don't know. Can you see that?
No. What does it say?
Okay. Found a lot of people actually appreciate a simplified crop selection. I guess it's kind of like a CSA thing, like salad, radish, turnip, spinach, micros, carrots, the basics. Yeah, I think there's some of that too, where just focusing on, like, I think for the anxiety part is like focusing on the crops that are going to do well, that like maybe aren't the ones you're super excited about, but like, are going to do well and perform and fill up boxes. I think that's another thing to help with your anxiety. Like, make sure you're growing stuff that you're confident with. I think that helps too.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I could go on for hours about, like how to do a proper CSA. I think we've put a lot of energy into it, and it's a special way of growing food, but it's also really challenging. And we moved away from it because not the anxiety, but this year in particular with the book and stuff coming out, we weren't quite sure what my schedule would look like in the middle and late summer. So we didn't want to, have to have an employee or something harvesting and distributing that to customers without knowing, like, kind of forcing that on somebody to have to do is a lot of work. It's easier to be like doing a market and be like, okay, pick carrots, beets, radishes, whatever, and they can go do that. But distributing a CSA is more complicated. But yeah, it's a great model. I really love the CSA, but it can be a challenge, and it's not always for everybody. And yeah, crop selection, keeping it simple, I think is important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you said is, like, over time you'll get more, more confident and like knowing, okay, well, these cucumbers are going to be ready in 3 weeks. And then they'll be ready in 3 weeks, roughly. You know what I mean? And you don't know that until you... Yeah.
Forecasting.
Yeah, forecasting. All right, here's another question here from Jared Lukens Black of Budding Moon Farm. Question for season 3. I guess it would be season 4. Is there season 4, Jesse? Have you decided yet?
Yeah, I think there will be a season 4. Southern Sarah gave us a grant for season 4, so it may be a lot of Southern growers.
Okay.
There will definitely be a higher presence of Southern growers in season 4.
Okay. Would you be open to doing some interviews that highlight different distribution models to overcome food access issues? I don't know. Have you talked about any of that stuff yet?
Yeah, we've talked about it in a few different interviews. Trying to think of who else had, yes. The short answer is yes, absolutely. I'm very interested in that. Hannah and I have talked about, we have a farm store at our new property, a place that we're going to turn into a farm store. Sorry, it's not a farm store yet. But having some potentially more of a pay what you can model there, because it's not, pay what you can is something that we've been into for a long time. We helped start a pay what you can restaurant, and we see the value in it. And a lot of people that do pay what you can models find that, oftentimes they're not seeing a lot of shrinkage. They're seeing, evening out, because some people give a little bit more and some people, take what they need, and it usually balances out pretty well. We're definitely interested in incorporating a little of that into our own model a little bit more, but it's not something you can bring to the farmers market because the other farmers would not put up with that. But that's something that we'd love to do more of that. And there's great models out there. I think I know that Soulfire Farm was doing, like, they're a nonprofit, so that's maybe a little bit different. Nonprofits are, in a for-profit business, it's a little bit more complicated trying to figure out how to do that, because you can't kind of lean back on grants and donors and people who can write off their donations and all that stuff. So, but yeah, it's a little bit more complicated, but I'm always trying to think of that, different distribution methods. So yeah, absolutely. I'm into it.
Cool. All right, let's go into another question here. Cameron Clark says, how the heck do you guys manage your time so well? Between making videos and running solid farms, you all seem to be thriving and having lots of positive energy remaining. I'm sorry, I'm laughing as I'm reading this. This is my first year selling out of my market garden, and it's going great, but I'm burning it at both ends, and I'm on less than 1/8 of an acre. Any tips for a noob on time management? Thanks, you guys rock.
That's yeah. I mean, I have so many thoughts on this question. I think that your first year is going to be bonkers. It's just the way it is. You've got too many things to do to rely on your systems yet, and that's we're on our new farm, we're going through that too. We've still got irrigation stuff to set up. We were just setting up the wash pack today to like get drainage and stuff, and it's wild. Your first year is just absolutely out of control. And that's how it goes a lot of times. You can start small and make it a little bit easier. And I know Josh just put up that part-time farming video that I thought was really good. And he can talk to that in a second. But to like directly answer the question, there's like technical answers to that question. Like, for one, my wife is amazing and she does so many great things to make my life possible and my children's life possible, and the farm run, like there's just, it's unbelievable. So that's like a very specific, but really important factor. Then there's also, like technical things like just stopping tillage helps, like not having to do as much cultivation as we used to when we were more tillage farmers, or even like low disturbance farmers. We did a lot of tillage in that, or a lot of cultivation in that. Took up enormous amounts of time. And then there's like the philosophical side, which is like I think about something my dad told me a long time ago was that if you want something done, give it to a busy person. And and like a dummy, I turned that into a philosophy and like a view of life where, and I saw this was true. Like in kitchens, you see it's true. I did a lot of cooking when I was younger, and it's always that prep cook who's just like out of his mind doing everything. And the chef comes down and is like, hey, Bill, cut me 2 onions. And Bill's got it because he knows where he can cut corners. He knows exactly where he can fit it in his timeline. And, for his prep list. And I always thought about that what happens when you get busy and when you start to compartmentalize stuff. And so part of my philosophy or approach to things has just been stay busy and you'll find the time. And because you do more, like you don't get anything done when you don't have anything to do. But when you have a bunch to do, you get everything done. And that's kind of like been and please don't, adopt this as a philosophy because I it's just the way my brain is. But like that, that's been helpful for me, is just like kind of, staying busy, like finding projects that when something needs to get done, I make a list and I just knock it off. And that's been helpful for me. And that's how I end up accomplishing so many more things than I expect to, and maybe should. It's staying busy. And I don't know. I don't know if that's helpful.
We always say like being a doer, like that's kind of just get it done, like get it done, move on to the next thing. But I think, I did talk about that in that recent video, which I just posted a few days ago. But a lot of it's efficiency and streamlining things, and just if something you don't need to do, like figure out a way to not have to do it. Like I don't weed on my farm. Like I went out with a hoe, maybe this morning, and I was like, oh, I should go cultivate a little bit, or is it yesterday? And I was like, there's nothing to cultivate. Like I walked around and I was like, I spent like 5 or 10 minutes. And I was like, oh, that's it. There's nothing to do. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and I hadn't done that in weeks. So yeah, I think just cutting rid of that stuff. Like I think the biggest thing for me has been, with killing everything and building beds and not tilling, like there's no weeds. Like that has been eliminated from my farm. And you talk to almost every farmer, and that's a huge part of what they do on a daily or weekly basis. So
yeah,
but yeah,
when we were doing more tillage, that was like what I thought farming was cultivation.
Yeah.
We would be out there for hours, and you had to get right up against the plants all day long. It just, it's brutal. I mean, that as soon as you eliminate that, you realize like, oh, farming's not as bad as I thought.
Planting and harvesting. Like that's what you got to do. I think the key is just you kind of have to think. For me, like, and I got this skill big time when I was brewing beer professionally, because I would think about all the tasks I had. Like I could be brewing that day, but while I had downtime when things were running, like processes were running, I could just like, oh, I'll just do that other quick thing that takes 10 minutes while this other thing is running. And all of a sudden you're getting 3 things done at once, and you can kind of think through the process throughout the day. Like, oh, I probably have 20 minutes here. Well, I'll get my Instagram post done in that 20 minutes while this thing's irrigating, or while, like there's always time you can be doing more than one thing and sort of multitasking. I don't know. That's kind of how I approach it.
Yeah, that's it right there. If you want something done, give it to a busy person.
All right, there we go. Doers. All right. Here we go. Another question here. We're about an hour in, Jesse. Seth Nivens, thanks so much for all you do. These conversations are always super helpful and inspiring. In Jesse's conversation with Steve Groff, Jesse mentioned mowing and then remowing rye and then planting into the residue. A few questions on that. What sort of mower do you use? Do you add mulch through the season to supplement as the rye breaks down? And have you tried that technique with other cover crops? Thank you. Keep rocking it.
Yeah. So that technique, we use the BCS flail mower, and it's set low. I've probably talked about this before, but I even write about it in the book. Just I set my BCS where it's going about a 1/4 inch above the soil. And so we mow the rye really low. It can't be too dense for that because it'll bog it down. But, that's something you have to play with on your own and just kind of figure out the densities, but, or you just have to go super slow. So go through your rye at milk stage, mow it down, and then mow it 1 week later and transplant into that. That's been successful for us, and I think part of that is because we're in a hotter climate, so that the rye, it doesn't love growing in that heat, especially anything that survived after the milk stage. It doesn't love growing in that heat, so it doesn't really come up. And anything that does, we just pick it out. And then the other thing though is the question about mulching it over the summer or like through the rest of the season. I think that's a good idea. We don't. It just depends on those particular rye patches have all been built onto already deep compost. So deep mulch. So there's no real need to, because the mulch is already kind of there. But you may need to, especially if you're going from that to, if you're going from like bare soil to that, then you'd probably want to mulch more over top through the summer, especially if you're in a long season situation. But if you've got your weeds in check, and it may not be an entire necessity, but the more you chop up your mulch, the more you chop up your cover crop, the more surface area it has for microbes to consume. So it's going to consume it faster. Yep.
Okay. All right. Last question. There was a couple more from Mike, but I can't answer all his questions. And some of them were covered. Here's one from John McCafferty. I live in an area that has a serious lack of market gardens. I find myself motivating others in this path, but feeling uneasy that I admit the fact that it can be financially, physically, and emotionally exhausting. In your work as a content provider, do you ever feel troubled encouraging others into this life, as it could be quite challenging? And do you ever tell people it's not for them?
I never say it broadly, but I certainly have spoken with people who've kind of said their situation and what they're trying to do, and said, maybe you should think about starting very small and seeing if it's for you, if it's what you want to do, or even going and working on a farm for a little while and seeing if it's for you. I never talk people out, and I kind of even touched on this earlier, I never talk people out of it directly. I want people to experience it for themselves so that they don't have that regret going forward of like, oh, I never tried it. I should have done the farming thing. Because we're all, that's just very human nature to be outside, to be working in the dirt. I think we all deserve to, give ourselves a chance at what that feels like to do, all day long, every day for a while, and just see what it feels like, see how your body responds. I think it's good for people to do that. And I don't necessarily talk people out of it. I think that it's something everybody should try if they want to try it. And I think that it's something that I am so happy I did, and took the leap and moved down to Kentucky from New York City. When I got done meeting with those winemakers I was talking about earlier, I'd go visit them in Europe and see what they were doing, and just like blown away at these guys and their concoctions and their and ladies, and they were doing such amazing things. And I was like, I want that. Like, I want to try that. I've got to try it. And also, like, if it doesn't work, there's so much on the periphery that you can be involved with. I know people that have tried farming and been like, yeah, maybe I want to be in food justice, or maybe I want to be in engineering, making tools, or maybe I want to be in, marketing or doing food hubs or whatever. Yeah. But they have that context to draw from now. Like, I understand the farm work. I felt it. And until you feel it's really hard to like know what it's like, and to be able to help farmers. It definitely helps to have been a farmer or tried it yourselves or worked on a farm.
I think I definitely have a couple things to add to this. With the interns I had at Raleigh City Farm last year, I think that was a lot of the experience for them. Was they worked on a farm for like 4 months, and they understood it. Like they got it. Like, even if they're not going to be a farmer afterwards, they know what that experience is like. They can understand it. They've lived it and they've worked out in the heat in July, they get it. Mm-hmm. So I think that's important for sure. I think for me as a content creator, I tend to try to give people more questions than answers. I've always been that way, kind of as a teacher. It's like, I'm not going to just tell you what the answer is. Like, you need to figure it out. Like, if I give you the things that these sort of parameters to think through, like when I do consulting for people that are looking to start farms, I generally ask them more questions than they ask me. And I'm like, this is your homework. Like, if you want to do this, like, you need to think about why this is the case. And I think that's a lot of the content I like to try to put out there. It's like, well, here's how to do things. But if there's bigger questions. Like, there's no answer for anybody's life. Like, you have to figure it out for yourself. And I think if you can give them ideas to help them figure out what's right for them, I think that's helpful. Like, I'm not going to like talk people out of it, but I've been like, hey, this is probably what you need to do. Or, you know, these are the 3 options. If you want to go all in, you want to start, you want to, I don't think I'm just like straight up telling people to do things or not do things. Like, it's got to make sense for them. So I don't know. That's kind of my take on it.
That's good. I like the idea of asking people questions or having people ask themselves questions, and you know, you've got to figure it out if it's right for you. And in terms of the content, like we, you know, create what we're into, and hopefully people who do take the leap can take something from what we're doing and what we're putting out there and apply it to what they're doing to make it easier, the transition. So.
And I think a lot of the content we put out there is to help people that like, hey, if you want to get into this, like, here's some legit resources to like be successful. Like, here's things that work and things that don't work, and just put it out there for people.
And also somewhat realistic. Like, we try and be as transparent as possible, and let people know that it's not always easy, and that, you know, the sort of Instagram farm is not like, it's not always as shiny as it looks, and to remind people of that. And I think it needs to be said more, you know, over and over again. Like, I've been farming for a long time, and we're 2 or 3 weeks behind on our crops, and like, you know, that's where we're at. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that like you know, if you're in that same situation, that you're doing things wrong. Everybody makes mistakes, and you're going to run into them, and that you need to, you know, it's farming's hard, and you know, that's okay too. And I don't know, all those things.
All right, let's get a couple questions from the chat. I think I got through most of the Patreon questions. I'm going back a little bit here. I'm bummed you can't see this on the screen, Jesse, but can you talk about Real Organic? I don't know much about the Real Organic project. I know, like, I see it, but do you know more about it? Can you talk on that a little bit?
I don't know that I, you know it enough about it to talk about it in terms of like, well, I could just say like the Real Organic project was born out of, you know, the movement to add hydroponics to the organic label to hydroponics, and really they wanted it to be soil based. I think it's a good movement. I mean, it's really interesting. I don't necessarily think have any, you know, anything specific against hydroponics. I don't personally think they taste as good. I'm not as interested in it myself. It seems like it's much more chemistry than it is biology. But it's, you know, you know, I think that if they want to label it, should maybe not be the same thing as organic. That's personal belief. You know, maybe hydro organic or water organic or something. But like, I think that the whole basis of organic farming was around soil and regenerating the soil and regenerating, growing healthy food from soil. So I think that, you know, without getting in too much trouble with some of our people who are watching it, certainly that I don't have an inherent problem with hydro having its own label for people who do it really well and do it really clean. I think that's something that's important, because I think it serves a need, but I also think that it's not necessarily the same as organic. So, I don't know.
Yeah,
but beyond that, I can't describe too many of the details of how the Real Organic project works.
Okay. Next question here is, what perennial crops do you find worthwhile? Are you growing any perennials?
Yeah, I mean, we grow like blueberries and raspberries and that sort of stuff every year. Strawberries are biennial, and then I mean, as many perennials as you can grow, like flowers, herbs. I really love thyme. Thyme is great. The little flowers on thyme bring in so many pollinators. Lots of herbs. I think those are. I mean, wherever you can incorporate perennials, you should. And in fact, with some of our wet spots on our new farm, I'm talking to a few people about like what I should deal with, in terms of like what can I plant there, because I'm not going to divert it. Like we were talking earlier, like I don't plan to divert everything in our garden. I'd rather build up the soil organic matter and put the plants that belong in those areas, rather than, try and go in there with a bunch of drainage tile and burying a bunch of plastic. I don't really like that. So I'd rather do with that biologically. So yeah, I mean, the perennials that I like the most are the perennials that make the most sense in that context.
Okay. All right. So next question here is, can you talk about your thoughts on using credit versus saving and paying cash in the context of running a farm business? For example, do you take out loans in the beginning of the season? I don't think people have asked me really about that before.
No, we've done it in the past. We've used credit cards in the past in the beginning of the season, for things that we knew we could pay off, shortly after, like by the time we started getting our CSA checks and stuff. I mean, leveraging your money, however, it makes the most sense and you can do it responsibly. Like if it's a loan, if it's a grant, if it's a, credit card, if you can do it and you understand how it works and you can keep yourself out of trouble, do it small, start small, make sure that you can do it. I think leveraging that stuff though can be effective if you're good at it. I don't know that I outwardly recommend doing that, but you've got to figure out where you've got to be creative with capital, especially like we've always had to be creative with our capital, just trying to figure out like what we can leverage here or there to get the farm started. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. In that video I just put out in part-time farming, I really talked about the idea of, if you have another job and you want to get into farming and you don't have the capital, like start the farm small, work extra hard in your spare time, take all that money and invest it back into the farm. Like you don't have to jump in right away. You can ease into it and build your capital that way. Like if you really want to do it and you don't have access to capital, like you have time. That's your capital. And you have to build your business that way. So I think that's probably a better approach, but if you need something, you need something. I mean, what else are you going to do? You know what I mean? Like if you need to buy a load of compost and you just don't have the money, like you have to buy it. You need it for the season.
Yeah, and there are better ways than credit cards. I mean, just thinking about I think that's when you're established and you feel confident in your revenue that you can do that. But we worked with some people who would ask their shareholders. They would just be like, "Hey, can you all kick us a loan and we'll pay you back in food or we'll pay you back in cash, whatever you want." So they would do that, and that was pretty. I mean, they bought a lot of stuff doing that. I think they bought like a tractor and a high tunnel, maybe doing that. That sort of approach too. I like the idea of the part-time job. I mean, I've always said that people could get, go work in a kitchen or go work serving at a restaurant if that's something in your area that you can do. Make a little extra cash, get to know the chefs, get to know the restaurant business and that sort of stuff, and that'll help pay you a little extra capital. There's no shame in that. There's no shame in having a part-time second job to help raise your capital. It's a little safer than relying on debt.
I think that's a better approach too, and you also learn other skills. Like if you take on a job in a restaurant, like that's another skill set, another like industry you're comfortable with that could help you out when you're trying to sell to chefs or into restaurants later. There's always other skills to pick up that help you with farm. I always talk about marketing. For me, it's always like learn how to do marketing. Like if you can learn that on the side while you're doing something else, like that'll pay back huge as well. So yeah, I'd probably work on that sort of approach rather than just like taking out a bank loan or something to start a farm, especially if you have no farming experience too. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Let's see here. Next question is thoughts about inoculating your living pathways with mushrooms. Have you put any thought into that?
The living ones or the wood chips one? The living ones,
grasses and stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, we spray them with, our biological amendments, like slurries and that sort of stuff, compost tea extract. With things like, a lot of times when people are inoculating mushroom pathways, they're doing it with King Stropharia, wine cap is also the common term for it. And you do that in wood chips, and King Stropharia is great. It's a really cool, flavorful mushroom. It's really big. But the problem with that is that you're stomping on those all the time. So you may not get, you may compact the fruiting quality out of them a little bit. They'll fruit up against the beds. But if they fruit in the open, they don't get that beautiful red color on them. They kind of turn brown, and they're not as marketable. They're still good eating, but in terms of like if you wanted to grow a marketable crop out of your pathways, you'd have to do that maybe between corn, or you'd really have to do it between something that's tall, and then you really have to watch those pathways for when they start fruiting. I think it's cool. I mean, that's a really great way of getting the nutrients out of your wood chips really quickly, because they're saprotroph, so they consume the wood chips, the lignin material in the wood chips, and they release the nutrients, and that's great for your plant roots to access out of the pathways. And and then you get a fruit out of that. So that, I mean, it can be great. I think in the right context, somebody could really do that well. We've tried it, and then usually wood chips are tough in our climate just because they wash out, or, like I said, you'll get some fruit, but it'll kind of be brown and it won't be super marketable. So it's still edible, still good, but yeah.
Okay. Jesse, you good for a couple more questions?
Yeah.
Okay. You seem pretty good tonight, Jesse. You're hanging in there.
Well, I decided not to have the beer during this. I decided to leave it as like a trophy at the, like a goal at the end.
Oh, okay. Was this
so this is me I'm like,
it's like the carrot. You're holding the carrot. You're holding the beer.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. So now we know how to do this. All right. Keep Jesse awake. Just all right. Let's see. Mike Slayton. Why do y'all think more no-till and ecological growers don't practice biodynamics? It just seems like a perfect fit. I had never heard a word.
I think that a lot of people were turned off by the sort of esotericism of biodynamics, and that really stems from for the uninitiated, biodynamics is a form of organic agriculture that was created by Rudolf Steiner in the 1920s through a series of lectures. And these lectures it happened to coincide. Some farmers had asked Rudolf Steiner to kind of figure out some troubles for them. And he studied agriculture for a while, and he came up with these lectures. And it just happened to coincide with a burst of esotericism in the 1920s in Germany, where people were just trying to be super esoteric. And I'm not saying he didn't believe this stuff, because he was also into he did the anthroposophy and all these other things, but it makes it really difficult for people to get down with, because it sounds almost like a religion when you're reading through the biodynamic literature. So I think that the kind of new wave of farmers kind of didn't resonate quite as much as maybe some older generations, like the Back to the Land people and those sort of things, resonated with talking about the ethereal and all these different life forces and the things that they talk about in biodynamics. Whereas the sort of the new wave of farmers tends to really respond well to Korean natural farming, which has much more science behind it, is much more, for an example, it has a lot more research behind it, and people who are talking very specifically about the biology and not necessarily about life forces and those sorts of things. But that said, I still think biodynamics has got some merit, and it's, like I said earlier in this conversation, just I think some of my favorite wines, almost like it was almost uncanny that I would taste a wine and I would go, this producer's biodynamic. I can tell, I can taste it. And almost every single time I found out they were biodynamic, or that they use some biodynamic preps. Some of the best wines in the world use them, and it works pretty well in that context. And I mean, I think that's the answer. I think that's why a lot of people are not into it, is they sort of see it as I don't know, too out there, but I think it's cool. I've always liked biodynamics, and I have an affection for it just because of my experience in the wine world. Yep.
Okay. Here's a question from Alexander Cervinka, small farmer in Florida, Gypsy Rooster Ranch. Want to know what kind of results or benefits you've noticed from locally sourced seeds or seeds you've personally saved over time. I didn't ask you this. Are you doing any seed saving this year? Do you have any plans?
Maybe not as much this year as we usually do, but we always save. We've been saving our okra for years, save our sweet potatoes, save our garlic. We always do that, and we'll always do that. Some of the more delicate ones like lettuce and stuff, I probably won't bother with that this season. I'd like to get more into seed saving. I don't know, in terms of benefits, I think it would be really cool to do more studies on not just regionally adapted, but also adapted to the kind of methods that we're using, the no-tillage methods, because I suspect that crops that are continuously grown in tillage systems are probably more adapted to high bacterial systems. And it would be interesting to see how much better they perform in what I consider what seem to be more fungally balanced soils, not necessarily fungally dominated, but more where there's more fungal presence than there maybe is more bacterial. Yeah, I mean, that stuff is really fascinating to me. I think that there should be more seed saving. And that's one, the Namu farm episode that we just put up talked a little bit more about seeds and seed production and sort of the weird underbelly of hybrid seeds. And that, there's a lot of power in just growing your own seeds. All the small growers ran into the issues of getting seeds this year, and it'd be nice if some more of us were growing them, and I could be like, hey Josh, did you grow that that beet seed this year like you always do? You'd be like, yeah dude, I got a bunch of it, I'll send it your way. That would be cool. I mean, I think that is something. It's in the same line, that kind of first question about sustainability. Are we there? Are we working towards it? I think that's something that needs to be on that list of like what we're of goals of what we're working towards, is maybe just a little bit of more of our own seed, maybe just a little bit more as a community able to support each other, and that we're, kind of testing new seeds and developing new seeds for our climates and for our production methods. And I mean, I think it'd be cool. I'd certainly love seed saving.
Yeah, I'm really curious about the seeds produced in similar growing conditions. I know we've talked about this for years already, but can we get seeds that were grown in sort of no-till, more balanced soils, stuff like that, or grown in your region? I think there's more talk about that now with different seed companies in different areas. I know like Southern Exposure Seed Exchange, like they're focused on getting stuff locally. I know I have a lot of talks with, Rebecca at Osborne about like, is this growing in your area? And she talks to growers like in North Carolina, Tennessee, like similar climates, about knowing what works and what doesn't. But yeah, I think seed saving is awesome. I just think it's really hard for market gardeners and small acreage, and a lot of the seeds we grow aren't, open pollinated seeds, and it's just, I don't know, like I'm not saving Salanova seeds, you know what I mean? And we're gonna grow Salanova as a market gardener.
Yeah, I mean, but there's other lettuces that could be developed, and I think I think about people developing seeds in the higher areas like Rocky. Wild Mountain seeds up in the Rocky Mountains out in Colorado. There's specific issues that high altitude growers deal with, which is high intensity sunlight. So developing seeds for that area, especially things like lettuce, like Salanova, may not make the most sense.
Right.
It may be something that's like that makes a lot of sense because it's adapted to create the phytochemical, genetically adapted to create the phytochemicals it needs to protect itself from the sun. You don't necessarily get that from Salanova. It's a good heat hardy crop, but it may not be a heat hardy crop in, 5,000 feet or 10,000 feet altitude. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think so. I think you're right. All right. Have you ever experimented? This is from Plant Grow Repeat. Have you ever experimented with adding mycorrhiza to your soil amendments like Mycos or Great White?
No. And not that I have any issues with those. I kind of have read through some of the literature, and it's like, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it could work. I haven't. I mean, I don't necessarily have any issue with that. I think that it's be good for soil mixes probably to add some sort of mycorrhizal, fungi, because you're not necessarily getting that out of compost. They require living plant roots. The spores may be there, but it's that stuff can be hit or miss. So, I don't know. I mean, I haven't experimented with it. I don't necessarily have an opinion on it. And this is one way or the other, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just reading through comments. A lot of people are going back and forth and sort of asking questions that, let's see here.
The hydro people mad at me?
No. No one's mad at you, Jesse. Okay. Don't worry. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if there's a lot of hydroponic growers like into the kind of content we put out. I don't know.
Yeah.
How often do you apply your compost teas and extracts?
Depends. Like right now with the drainage issues, I'm actually applying them it's about once a week right now. And with the drainage issues, I just want to make sure when the living, like we're broad forking around, like even in the pathways to kind of open it up a little bit. And then we're spraying the compost extract tea into those areas, so that there are living plant roots already in the beds. So the roots are there. We're trying to spray so that we're kind of coating the roots in fresh, good microbiology, so that if it gets down into that the really poor drainage parts where there's some anaerobic spots. We want to make sure that the good biology is established. So about once a week right now, and then as the season goes on, that'll probably go down. Like we'll probably go, especially as stuff recovers a little bit more, we won't be spraying once a week. We'll probably every 2 weeks or something, and only in the spots that need it. And we always dip our our transplants into the compost tea extract, or just into an extract or a slurry more often than not, where I just take some vermicompost, put it in some water, and it's a fast and dirty way. But then I put the tray into that mix for a few minutes and then transplant that, so it gets on the bottom of the transplants before they go in the soil. So
is that
that's the easiest way.
Is that something you'll continue to do like year after year, or only in like the first year or two?
Year after year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't know that I'll have to do it year after year. As the soil gets better, it may not be necessary, but I don't know. It's one of those nerdy things I like doing. So
as long as you don't move again. As long as you don't move again, Jesse.
Right. Yeah. Well, at this point, I'm terrified of moving after my drainage experience.
All right. Here's one. Let's do one last question, Jesse. We've been at this for a while.
Yeah.
Here.
Last one.
All right. How important is crop rotation on a small market farm? I only hear about this from JM, but he's got a large farm.
How important is crop rotation? It's very important to my organic certifiers. I don't ever put the same crop in this, the same crop family in the same area twice in a season, in a 10-month period, let's say. I don't know how important it is. I hear people go back and forth. If you're not having disease issues, it's probably not that important, but are you going to create disease issues by putting them in the same place? Maybe. That stuff I just don't feel like it's necessary to risk it. For us, what we've been doing a lot of is each bed shares 2 crops at least, per planting. So we'll actually split the bed in half, where maybe half of it will be beets and half of it will be lettuce. And these are 4-foot beds. We didn't talk about how I went to wider beds, but these are 4-foot beds. So then the next planting could be lettuce where the beets were the lettuce was. Even though the lettuce wasn't that far away, it was still sharing a bed. They kind of get swapped out, but I don't know. I mean, we are conscious of that as a certified organic farm, and we do show that we rotate our crops. Is it technically necessary? Sometimes I don't know. Sometimes I see literature that's like, yes, it's absolutely necessary. And sometimes I see stuff that's like, meh. So I think do it especially if you have diseases, you have to do it. But I mean, I think it's probably smart to rotate them to some extent. Yeah.
Yeah. I've always been the school of thought where just, follow one crop with a different crop. Like if you have lettuce, plant carrots. If you have carrots, plant, kale, whatever. Like just follow one with another family. And I just had the thought, I guess I hadn't talked to you about this yet, Jesse, but like now that I'm totally addicted to interplanting, by the way. I know you said this to me a while ago. You go, once you start, you look at every bed that isn't in, you're like, what's wrong with that bed? But now I'm like, wait, I have lettuce and onions in there. Like, what do I follow that with? Like, I don't plant that much stuff. I'm like, do I plant it? Do you just switch it up and just do lettuce and onions like in the reverse spots, like in the same bed?
I've done that, yeah. I mean, or you can think of it like you have a cleanser. Like you could throw some arugula, do one round of arugula, and then go back and try and put your lettuce in a different spot than it was before. But yeah, I mean, if you're in your situation, like it can be a little bit, bit tighter than my 10-month period. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, I've been having that like, but I already am like kind of doing both. Like now what do I follow it with? I have to have a completely different interplant. Anyways. Yeah, I don't feel strongly about that. I just try to not plant the same thing in there over and over and over again. That's kind of my thought. Right. Yeah. All right. Anything else you want to add?
Things like, I mean, only that things like lettuce and stuff I'm not as concerned with, unless they're showing disease issues, and then you've got a problem. But brassicas tend to be the one that always comes to mind for me. They tend to be heavy eaters, especially the longer season brassicas, kale, broccoli, all that stuff. They tend to be heavy feeders, so they require a lot of nitrogen, and then, and then they share diseases, and they're. So I don't know. I wouldn't mess around with those maybe as much.
Okay, Cool. Anything else you want to just add in? I know we were like, oh, we'll come back and have a discussion on something, and then we just answered questions for the whole time. But do you have anything else you want to talk about, or kind of just?
No, I think that's good. I think it's beer 9:30 for me.
Okay.
And I'm gonna go check on the family, see how everybody's doing. But I appreciate everybody coming out, and I saw apologies to the hydro folks, and but thank you all. And yeah, I don't know. I appreciate it. This is so much fun to come out here and do this and see how many people have been engaged and are asking questions. And yeah, it's amazing. And support our work, through no-tillgrowers.com. We can, the book will be out in July, and when you buy that book, the proceeds from that go into making this kind of content. So you can find that at no-tillgrowers.com, or you can kick us a few bucks on Venmo to @no-tillgrowers, or sign up for the patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, or any of those things. That's, that money just keeps Josh and I sitting here bantering and for you. So.
All right, Jesse. Well, thanks for your time tonight, and appreciate everything you do too, Jesse. I know we work together a lot, but I'll just say thank you as well.
Hey, then thank you to you, Josh.
All right, man.
A ton as well.
All right, have a good night, Jesse.
You too.
All right, so big thanks to Jesse as usual. Just an amazing person, and great for the community, and just puts his whole heart into everything. So really happy to have him on. I know it's kind of funny to have Jesse on the No Till Growers channel as a guest, but it's kind of the way it is with the show. But anyways, thanks so much, guys, for watching tonight. And again, if you do want to check out some of the older Growers Live shows, they are available as a podcast as well. So with that, we'll see you guys in 2 weeks, every other Tuesday night. Thanks again.